Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining our gallery tour today. I'm Takahashi Mizuki. I'm the curator of Interweaving Poetic Code exhibition hosted by the CHAT Center for Heritage Art and Textile. So due to COVID-19, unfortunately, we couldn't have the Taeyoon. He is the artist director of these exhibitions as well as an artist and for setting up the show. But today, I'm so delighted to have Taeyoon virtually to make this special virtual tour together. When I saw the exhibitions after setting the shows, I was so moved and I was thinking all the conceptual journey we worked together for last 2 years almost. So I'm so happy to walk through the gallery and exhibition together this time, although, even though the virtually. Okay, so let me start the video. This is the very beautiful hall inside the mills. And the CHAT, sometimes we use the large scale installations. And this time we have your beautiful pink blue banner pieces and together with Andreas Angelidakis large scale module installation, so-called demos. Yeah, and we are so happy to see the many visitors from, kids to adult, enjoying, sitting down on the demos and taking the pictures under your banners. So I'm sure, perhaps this might be the first largest piece, artworks you made in your artist career. But how do you think, looking at this installation shot?
Thank you so much for inviting me. This was a very long and ambitious project that we worked on together, which we are very excited to share with the Hong Kong audience and also the international audience. It's really heartwarming to see the flags and demos installed together, especially at the hall because it is a public space. An idea of inviting the community into the exhibition and to ask this question about the relationship between code, textile, and care. And we do it in a way of creating this temporary furniture where the visitors could sit on, move around, and it's very inviting. And Andreas worked with the textile sample, the patterns from CHAT, and he created this three-dimensional object. The demos is about asking the relationship between the virtual space and the physical space. So that's a perfect way of opening up the exhibition. Yeah, the banners are made specifically for the hall. And I conceived the idea 2 years ago when I was invited for a residency. And I wanted to introduce the characters of the Interweaving Poetic Code. And the very first row, you have a binary poetry. That poetry is a background for my practice. In the exhibition, Amor Munoz piece introduces binary calculation very precisely. Andreas was inspired by many different sources, including video games and simulation spaces like Minecraft, which is a very popular video game for young people. And the idea of these video games are you could build a world based on your imagination, and it's very limitless. And in this exhibition, he extrudes those concepts into a physical space. And I think the audience understand it right away.
Yeah, I can sense that. Okay, we landed in CHAT Arcade. So when you alive CHAT Arcade floors, your hand-woven beautiful flag are welcoming to the visitors.
The process of learning to weave was important. And it was important that I learned to weave and have my pattern become textile as a part of the exhibition. My reason for learning to weave was that I heard so many times about the relationship between weaving and coding, from its history, from its concept of binary. And I wanted to figure out if it really is similar to coding. And my experience is that weaving is much more difficult than coding because there's a lot of materiality involved, a lot of patience and attention to detail. It's very much about using your body and engaging with the material. I think that was my answer. I think the mathematical relationship do exist, but the kind of labor that goes into making a weave is very honorable, time-consuming, and I think that's very common across different cultures.
Yeah, okay, so with this, the beautiful flag, then I have to ask the motif is walking chair. What? Yes, that's this working chairs often appear in your drawing or your writing. So what it is?
I am an educator and also an artist, and I've been thinking about the relationship between students and teachers. And the walking chairs represent learners, people who could be students, people who are investigating their own ideas. And they often have just 3 legs because the other legs, I think, is busy walking. And I like the idea of abstraction. And they are all shaped slightly differently. So it's the idea of an active learner. And in the way, we are inviting the audience into the exhibition as an active learner. Interweaving Poetic Code is an exhibition and programs that question the relationship between textiles and code and idea of care. I conceived of the idea when I was doing the residency at CHAT. I wanted to invite my collaborators and some of the community members to explore these concepts together. And as an artistic director, my role involved inviting other artists, trying to help the curatorial team understand their practice, and try to help the artists understand the unique institution of CHAT and Hong Kong as a site. So in a way that I was a cultural translator and a mediator between different groups. When I was first invited by Mizuki, I thought all the artists will be in Hong Kong for the opening and kind of do workshops and really celebrate our time together, almost like a summer camp. Because of the COVID-19, that was not possible. So we tried to do what was the next best thing, which was online forum, workshops, and even parties that are happening. So we're doing our best, but there has been some deep compromises.
I recognize it as actually, to be honest, after installing the exhibitions, this exhibitions is roughly divided into 3 chapters. And the first chapter is narrating the Taeyoon, your practice, and introducing who you are and how it's your artistic journey as an educator, workshop planners, also the artists who makes the painting and the drawings, also sometimes making the performance in collaboration with the others. This exhibition starts the CPU dumpling. Is one of the representative workshops. That is the best piece to introduce your teaching methodology and also how to open up their skill and specific knowledge in this regard to the computation to those who are not familiar with. In this exhibitions, we are showing the big mural and made by you and designed by you, and along with the documentary video of the CPU dumpling. Please tell me more about this CPU dumpling workshop.
CPU dumpling workshop it's about half cooking class on how to make dumpling and half introduction to central processing unit, which is the core of a computer and computer architecture. This was developed initially at the School for Poetic Computation, where I worked. And I've done this workshop in various places. And I actually did it just yesterday for the Hong Kong audience. That was really fun. I think this piece is a really good introduction because I see my practice as a builder of metaphors. And metaphors work really well in sometimes, and it's not always working though, because metaphors have limitation. But metaphors allow a space for imagination, and it makes a space for taking a chance. So most people think they don't understand computers or mathematics. Most people say that they are really bad in science. And even the computer engineers say they were bad in science. So I think that's really interesting. And I wanted to open up the exhibition with a very playful workshop so that the museum visitors is not scared by the concepts.
Yeah, you often say that it's demystification is also the one of the a very important practice when you touch upon the the subjective matters in the art projects or exhibitions. Right? I think it's this CPU dumpling is also strongly related to your idea of the demystification of the technology. As you said that there's many people say that I'm really bad in math or the science as I am, but we received a lot of benefits from these technology and the science, especially that it is very difficult to survive without a computer right now, but we are not familiar with what kind of the technology and are used in computations or in the digital devices. So therefore, that's naturally the render us very passive user because we are unfamiliar with the technology and also some technical specific terms which are used. So I think it's as you said that there's using the metaphor to make the intellectual barrier lower. That's also very important. Also, it's a kind of the way of the popular education to make the knowledge more accessible.
Yeah, and more flavorful.
Yes. Yeah, and I also heard that there's all participants in Hong Kong yesterday of CPU dumplings that they are so satisfied. Okay, so then we go inside the gallery one. This time you made a very beautiful, powerful drawings a lot. And your drawing existing here and there is overall gallery spaces. I also especially appreciate you tried to write the traditional Chinese letters this time.
Yeah, that was really important for this exhibition. I learned to write Chinese characters when I was very young as a student in South Korea, but I forgot about it for about 30 years. So it was coming back to the calligraphy. And I really like writing Chinese. I think it's very sculptural. There's a lot of relationship between strokes and dots and their combination. It's very visual. I wanted to have the languages available for the Hong Kong audience, and the CHAT team provide a really good translation and actually assisted me with writing of these. And I think we have almost all of the writing on the walls translated into Chinese as well. So we wanted to make it accessible for the local audience.
Yeah, I think that is very important. And I'm sure our visitors enjoy reading the text and the writing. And also my Hong Kong colleague also said that your handwriting Chinese character is so cute, visually, charming. And you also made the interaction video. And so this is your small, tiny paintings. Inside the gallery, the exhibition starts with tiny paintings. So could you tell me what is that paintings about?
This painting is about the concept of computation. And it's important to say that the full word, because code is oftentimes used as a tool for large machines or finance or internet. Its code is used everywhere. And computation is a bit of a broader term. And it includes code, but it could also include different systems like legal system or idea of kind of a social system. And there's always idea of computation. The text says computation is not an option available for presence, but a precondition for it. This is borrowed by Alexander Galloway's book. Alex was one of the keynote speakers of our forum. And I wanted to open up the exhibition of equation of like co-thinking as computation and inviting the audience to think together with me.
I really love this space. We installed your graphic pieces along with your handmade computers, with your videos showing how you made it, these small computers. What motivated you to make these handmade computers?
These handmade computers are created as teaching tool and also a sculpture. It was important for me to learn to make a computer when I was teaching at the School for Poetic Computation in New York, because in order to have a poetic expression, you need to understand the fundamentals. People joke that if somebody asks what is poetry, a very young kid might say, poetry is saying a lot with very little. And I think this handmade computer is doing that. It has the minimal component of transistors and LED, and it does 8-bit computation. And the drawings there accompany the sculpture. Some of them are just technical explanation of how these things work. And other things are more philosophical, asking about our relationship with technology at large.
And also I like the aesthetic, because you mentioned that you made these pieces as a sculptures, that those handmade computers look so vulnerable in a way.
Kind of the opposite of your iPhone. iPhone is made by giant machines, and there's thousands of processes that go into making single iPhone. But it's really difficult to fix a smart device like that. And most people don't understand how it's made. So idea of demystifying technology was actually trying to make something so simple that I, who is not trained in computer science, physics actually plays a really important part in all of this. Physics and chemistry to some part, but mostly physics. Just understanding electricity, the current, voltage, resistance. These are very simple language of the physical world that computer runs on. But in order to make the handmade computer, I had to learn physics. And this time it was much more interesting, and I had a really good time understanding. And the drawings actually are my way of visually explaining how physics work inside of a computer. All the drawings are done freehand, and I try to make the electronics freehand as well. That is not as easy. And improvisation is really important. These drawings were made while I was building the handmade computer.
Yeah, along with the drawings, we also show the 2 large paintings by you, and accompanied by 2 poems written by your friends.
So the paintings give more space for me to explore ideas compared to the drawings. And painting is more meditative, and it takes much longer time. And these 2 paintings are actually about analog and digital as 2 different ways that computers communicate. And they were made over a course of a few years and used as a backdrop for some of the conferences that I organized before. So I thought it was appropriate to include it. And the poems are by my friends who are also artists and programmers. There's this tradition of ekphrastic poetry, which is like the poems that are made in response to the visual art. And I wanted to replicate that history with these artists. No, just the drawings and sculptures, but the paintings are the first time. And it's the first time to frame them. So it really looks more like an art now.
I had the computer science guy when I conducted the gallery guide once, and I could see that from the point he noted, during my tourings. But I have very, very little poor knowledge about the computer science, so I was, they're scared. What I'm saying is correct or no wrong. But yeah, I wanted to learn from him how he looking at your pieces actually, so how he interpret. And this piece, everybody love it. 3 paintings and the 3 Wi-Fi modules are connected to the 3 natural gardens in Hong Kong.
So idea was that these are virtual gardens. And there are creatures that live there, and they look kind of like mushrooms or dinosaurs. And if the visitor used their smartphone to connect to the local Wi-Fi, they can see the creatures coming into their screen. And I think the beauty is when you are visiting with your friend and both of you connect to the same garden, the creature walks from one phone to another. I wanted to create a different kind of internet where the physical relationships are honored and where we are not relying on the centralized corporate services. So it's a kind of an imaginary internet where it's the metaphor here is a garden.
I also like these pieces because the substantial object, meaning the 3 paintings, are connected with the virtual garden in poetic way. I think that really represents what you are doing and what you are trying, and also the cultivating the natures and virtual spaces together with their friends.
And I worked with a very old framer in Seoul to make the wooden frame for Wi-Fi router. and that was really interesting because I gave him the router and he was looking at it funny. And then I was like, please make it as traditional as possible. I think that's really interesting to think about Wi-Fi as an artistic space, connection between physicality and the digitality.
Yeah. Yes, I can see that they said those the 3 framed routers look very, very serious.
Yeah.
Even more serious than your paintings.
These codes are actually monitoring the 3 Wi-Fi gardens. So when the visitors access each of the gardens, such as Kowloon, it should show your phone has connected. So this is like a watchtower for the garden.
So you just mentioned that there's even the virtual world, most of the case controlled and nominated by the central kind of big corporation company. So they are monitoring the individual behavior and access through this kind of monitors.
They are, and also we are voluntarily sharing it by posting our photos on Instagram and Twitter. So it's not only like the big brother is watching us, we are actively giving away our information. It's kind of complicated to think about the politics of that. The more conventional techno activists would say that we need to protect our data and use free open source software and down with the corporation. But I work with disabled communities and various community groups who actually need these technologies to be very consistent and for it to work all the time and make it more accessible. So I'm more in the line of like we should preserve what is important for us, but actually work with the companies to make a better technology for all.
Okay, then the next space, we are showing your performance piece. Actually, this performance piece you also restaged in Hong Kong a few years ago. That was the first time I met you. I was invited to on the stage along with the other audiences. You know, this performance gave me the inspirations. Okay, computations and the textile actually can be coexisted in the same exhibitions. The idea of the care, because, you know, textiles are often used for care. When you get injured, you need a bandage to attach on the wounds. And when you feel cold, you need a blanket or jacket to keep you warm. So I think it's also, of course, the jacquard weaving room is the archetype of the computer machines. That is the reason why I invited you to explore some kind of the common ground between computation, textile, in the theme of care. Yeah, but then could you remind me a bit about this performance?
The performance is titled Distributed Web of Care. The idea is that there are ways to materialize internet and different kinds of network with our own bodies using simple materials such as string. And after a lecture performance, I invite the whole audience to become part of the network, and oftentimes involved in music and different kinds of accessibility features. In this photograph, which is a documentation from the Whitney Museum, the person at the center is actually a blind person, and she's communicating with other members of the network just by the string. That relationship where strangers can talk to each other using their bodies and take care of each other and be vulnerable and take risk in kind of creating these web. That's really beautiful and also therapeutic. Obviously, this happened all before COVID-19. So I think this piece really captures a moment in time idea of imagining for different types of future with technology.
I also feel that this entire your artworks or projects and workshops, although your practice is much talking about the computations and the technology, but always remind us the human being behind. Especially in communication in the virtual world, we often forget people's, real human being exist. So therefore, we sometimes easily become very aggressive, and we tend to use a very violent words, and which we seldom use in the real world communications. The leaving very strong existence of the human and vulnerability of the human's body in your project is very important for me.
Yeah, I'm a performance artist.
Yeah, and also these huge murals. I think it's figures in the central. The motif in this drawing is bigger than the real human size. They're specially made for these exhibitions. Could you tell about this piece a bit?
So the mural was an illustration of different ways of making network. And I often use strings and other materials to visualize the relationship between different nodes. And at the very center, there are two people who are guiding each other. And one has their eyes closed, and then the other person is guiding them safely. So this idea of care is about interdependence between two people. And there are other technical terminologies such as decentralization, distribution, information, and data. And there are really important distinction between these and political connotations of these word choices. But other than going really deep into the technical details, I try to open up the space for people to play and to imagine, like, what kind of technology do you want? And what kind of internet do you want to build for the future?
Okay, so next space, it looks very, very minimalistic, black and white pieces. We are showing the piece you collaborated with the Christine Sankem, and also your knit piece, which are made by the Hong Kong knitting manufacturer. I feel that this collaboration with Christine seeming to be very important in your artistic career. Could you tell your piece and also your friendship with the Christine?
In the exhibition, we have the Future Proof, which is 7 motorized wind chimes that operate at a different frequency. And the piece was initially created for a performance in Media City, Seoul Biennial. Christine and I had this idea of creating wind chimes that are working, wind chimes that do not need wind. We thought the wind chimes are like a different types of clock because, if you go to a temple, there are wind chimes that are just very slowly giving sense of the time passing. So we really liked that idea, and we wanted to think about the future of time. And we thought making of these motorized sculptures could be a tool. We have the video documentation from 2016 and an updated version for CHAT, which we made interactive so the visitors could press the textile and activate the wind chime. Christine's drawings are also different types of futures in American Sign Language. So Christine is born profoundly deaf, meaning she does not hear anything, and she communicates with sign language primarily. And in sign, there are various ways of saying future. The traditional way would be just that, kind of like pointing out your arm and waving forward. But there are many different types of future, like a very jagged future, or McDonald future, or a confused future. So these drawings are different ways of signing the future. That's really important for her practice to give diversity of voices to sign language, which most people just think is a one type of language, but it's not. And meeting her was an important moment in my life as a friend and also artist and collaborator. Christine is one of the most generous and open-minded person that I've ever met. I mean, I like to think about the relationship as I learned so much from her about deafness, disability, different culture. And I try to teach her about the Korean heritage, the language, different types of culture, which she does not have access to. And that has been a really great give and take between us. We met in New York in one of the art exhibitions that she was doing, and only realized after many years later that we actually went to the same high school in California.
Oh, okay.
So we didn't know back then, but I think, yeah, she's doing really great work these days. And this is the last collaboration that we did. And it's very special for the exhibition of Interweaving Poetic Code as well, because it connects the technology to the disability community to different kind of spaces and community time. So we place this work as almost like a arrow into the other part of the exhibition.
But in the striking point of their performance and this piece in collaboration with Christine is actually this piece is a sound piece, although she's deaf. How did you guys decide to make the sound piece?
She is a sound artist who is deaf. So sound is not only what you hear with your ears. Sound is vibration. It is different types of senses of space. And deaf people experience sound in many different ways. So in this wind chime, it has movement. It has different sculptural qualities. And the wooden base is actually shaped like Christine's drawings. So she designed that. Mm-hmm. So when we did a performance in Seoul, we invited deaf audience as well. So they were able to experience it in their own ways.
We tend to understand those who have the disability from our angle. I think it's a more important thing is to listen to them. I think it's they have their own strengths and the ability to sense the things surrounding them. In opposite to their hard drawings, we also show you the knitting pieces, which made for anyone, but especially for the people, blind people.
Yeah, I was really fortunate to work with the textile manufacturer in Hong Kong who agreed on making a custom piece that are code examples. So these are very basic codes that people like to learn and use. And for example, the code is about making a shape of a triangle using JavaScript. And there are many ways of doing that. So I've explored various ways. The panel on the left are the code, and the code is not complete. It's just a segment of the code. And the right side is the execution, which are the output. And I made this into textile thinking that the blind people are invited to touch the code. Most of the blind people use screen reader, which kind of make the text into an audio format. But textile has this versatility to be more flexible and forgiving to touch.
Yeah, actually people love touching these pieces.
Good.
Yeah, and also I like the simpleness. You know, I think it's of this works with the minimalistic, the beauty, and which echoing very well with their Christian's drawings as well, and also very that creates very meditative space with the sound of the chimes. Okay, then we enter the next space, which where we are inviting your fellow artists. And how did you choose your fellow artists for this exhibition?
Yeah. In thinking about the exhibition, I try to invite artists whose practice are different from each other, but all share a common interest in textile and code or technology. And just to be clear, they are not all my best friends. I have not met some of them, but I've been following their work for some years. And the artists come mostly from the United States, just because that's where I was living and working. But I try to invite artists from Mexico and Europe, as well as, we try to engage with Hong Kong artists through collaborations and workshops.
Yeah, then the interesting read, except for Andreas, the rest of the artists are all female. Do you remember that one day that we talked that is once, the exhibition entering the more textile pieces, then the most of the artists is becoming female artists. Perhaps because of this conversation, when I got know that you started weaving, that made me really happy.
Well, it's female and also gender non-binary artist. I think there's a cultural shift these days about recognizing that just because you're born female does not mean you recognize as a woman. But even with that, it's primarily people who identify as women or non-binary. And that's true. A lot of the artists who work in textile are female. And I've actually had this conversation with some of those artists, and they say it's because, for one, the technology field can be very unwelcoming for women. So although some of these artists have history and training as a computer scientist or programmer, they do not want to work in that space. And they choose to work in the craft and design space because they are more free from harassment and discrimination. And secondly, I think the textile and code is a really emerging field. There's this terminology of e-textile, which stands for electronic textile. And it means that using fiber or any kinds of textile material that are conductive or has a kind of a value in creating electronic circuitry. So it could be a sensor or it could be output. And that space is actually very much populated by female engineers as well.
Yeah, so the first artist audience encounters this space is this beautiful printing pieces made by the Alati Padi. Yeah, could you tell me why you invited her?
Mm-hmm. Arati has been exploring the relationship between memory, cultural heritage, and machine learning algorithm. So she has found some photographs and textile patterns from her family, as well as a found footage of Indian heritage. She has been creating these generative patterns from those data. I thought that's a really interesting way to use code and also textile, and a beautiful way of using machine learning to be more expressive. Machine learning is oftentimes used just to create an average of a very large data set. That could be used for predicting stock markets, or it could be used for anything. But in this case, it is a very personal and tactile approach to code and textile. These patterns do hold connection to the land and heritage, probably not in a direct way, possibly in much more kind of remixed way, if that makes sense. And if that is an identity of the artist, yes, but I think the more striking part about this piece is trying to think about how machines see the world. And if the machines see these textile patterns and replicate it, what it might look like. Mm. So rather than just thinking about human cognition, perhaps collaborating with the algorithm to create something new.
Yeah, so I think we are almost saying the same things from different angle. I totally agree that these patterns are generated from the computers, how they reading the pattern. But somehow I feel the context are lost. So because they have their own, the methodology to analyze the pattern, right? That's something that's different from us.
It's interesting because machines are actually created by humans in the first place. Yeah. So they replicate our behaviors.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering how much the computer classified and combined the different pattern elements from the, with the context, how each patterns and the form were generated. I mean, original context.
I think that depends on different stages of the machine learning. Like many other artists, Arati is doing an online workshop on coding. This type of work is oftentimes accompanied by educational workshop. And I think that may be the answer to these questions that we have.
And then the three pieces made by Amor Munoz is one is the coded textile, matter and memory, and the other one is the Morse code game board, which are more directly touching upon the idea of coding.
Amor's piece is exploring the relationship between code and textile in the most direct way. And she invites the audience to the process of encoding and decoding. And she has these game boards and invites the audience to decipher certain poems in the tapestry. It's just a really beautiful execution of how computers and textile have this relationship and how a simple form could become a beautiful and very impactful manifestation of the relationship. That is interesting, the idea of taking time, because it takes a long time to make these tapestries. So the audience, they could spend 30 minutes to read the poem. I think this piece, and along with other artists' work, I want to talk about the importance of craft, importance of the delicacy of the artwork, which may not be so apparent in the video. These are just really well crafted, mostly by hand. That level of dedication and care into the material is an important part about the exhibition.
Okay, then the next artist is Kobakan. We are restaging their tailor shop that they opened in Berlin a few years ago. Tailor shop of the e-garment, the tailors. It's a really, really funny story behind these tailor shops. And but how did you meet the Kobakan? How did you get know their practice?
I met Kobakan when they were starting their collective many years ago. They were exploring the connection between textile and computing by making everything themselves. And they have been publishing tutorials online. So if you look for how to make a LED bracelet, most likely you will find their tutorial. So they're quite well known in that space of hobbyists and textile people. And also they are very great storytellers. So when they made this tailor shop in Berlin, they invited the local audience to imagine what kind of garments that they want in the future. And they try to make it. And some of those garments are in the exhibition and they have some functionality. But most importantly, the connection between the imagination to the interaction is important for this piece. Their practice is critical, yes. And particularly about the point of Fordism and mass-produced consumerism, which you've touched upon. And they're really interested in the labor of making something and the value of that, and also idea of repair. So if you make everything from scratch, it's more likely that you can repair it if it breaks, whereas the fast fashion or smart devices are impossible to fix. And yeah, I'm really interested in the tailoring because my grandfather was a tailor. He had a shop for a few decades. The shop closed when the Western suits became more popular as kind of mass-produced items. But for, I believe, between 1950 until 1990, the shop had customers, and it was a very human relationship. So you go to the shop, and then your son goes to the shop, and when they get married, you make another suit, and etc. I guess we are missing that kind of relationship with each other and to the things that we buy. And Kobakan is actually asking that question, like, what if in the future we have that relationship with the tailor? some of these garments have technical functionality. One of the gloves is for a person who has a missing finger. The garment is actually used by the client on an ongoing basis. So it has practical elements as well as the poetic and suggestive elements.
Now we are moving to their space, which accommodate Laura Davidoff pieces, and you're touching the internet. Laura's practice as a designer, researcher, is also very interesting. Could you tell me how did you get to know her works?
So Laura is an academic. She's a professor who has published very widely about e-textiles and the relationship between weaving and code. So I read one of her papers and I thought, wow, this is really fascinating. The particular pieces that we have brought in, there are two pieces. The one is a textile that work as a computer memory. An idea is that it holds the bit of information inside of the textile. And she has handcrafted the whole piece. If the computers were not made with silicons and electronics, but with the textiles and entirely by hand. The practicality and usability of these computers are unlikely. However, it does show that computers are essentially these conceptual machines that we could weave. The second piece is a garment that she wore during the pandemic. She has to take care of very young children as a mother, and the garment actually kept track of the parts of her body that she was using to hold her child. The garment actually replays those patterns through heat. So if you use the special camera, you can see the patterns of the very bodily labor replaying into the garment. So this is really fascinating way of thinking about the corporality or the materiality of the body, the textile, and the labor that you perform for your loved ones.
Okay, so next to Laura's work, we also show your touching internet pieces along with the documentary video you made during your residency in Hong Kong 2019.
I had about a month's time in Hong Kong. One of the things that made it special was a visit to the Ebenezer School and Home for the Visually Impaired. And it's a very historic school for the blind students. With the CHAT team, I was able to do a few experimental workshops using textile. And the outcome was these 3 garments that I tried to invite the students to touch. And each garment has a different network diagram, the centralized, decentralized, and distributed. And the students were also invited to make their own network. And they talked about their friends abroad and how they communicate using the internet.
Now we are living the unlearning space that is very active as the video shows.
We've conceived of the unlearning space as a space where the visitors could touch, play, and make something. And we called it unlearning because we didn't want to enforce a very strict rule about what to make. And the visitors can take the kits and work with the tutorial to make something of their own. We want people to see the exhibition, but also feel like they could make something of their own. Idea of unlearning is that you can challenge what you learn and how you learn. If I called it a learning space, I'm expected to have the book, tutorial, and a lesson to follow exactly what to do. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted people to ask, what do I want to make?
Yeah, I think that's happened all the time and very popular. And I also like this space because actually our learning and the community team, they prepare a lot of hands-on experience. Is incorporating the coding,
Yeah.
So therefore, the visitors also can learn the how coding actually is applied in textile making as well. Okay, then once the visitors step out from unlearning space, we exhibit your beautiful painting and graffitis and also murals.
Notes and drawings that I made over the few years. And particularly, there's two sections. The one about education. And I have a lot of questions about education as a hierarchy and also power. And I ran a very small school for a few years until recently. And I think unlearning is this concept that came out of being part of academia as a professor, but also as an alternative educator. Mm. The last wall is from my residency at CHAT. I was very inspired by the people that I met, the types of communities that I was invited to, different reactions to social change and creative practices. You might notice that some of the drawings actually have Chinese characters because I was trying to communicate some concept to my Hong Kong-based friend. And I'm happy to exhibit it in CHAT as a final note, end note for the exhibition.
I found the interesting relationship between this last exhibit, in the exhibitions, somehow echoing with your CPU dumpling, because it's a CPU dumpling workshop is the attempt to demystify the technology, right? For me, the wall is demystifying who is Taeyoon. I think it's because it's all the notes, exhibited notes contains various topics. It's almost like the fragment of your thought, the ranging from the long distance relationship to the politics. So it's almost kind of the demystifying the single person, how you reacted to the world incidents, also their personal events.
I think something that is personal is also very political. And, we are not isolated from our surroundings. And for the exhibition, we wanted to explore the idea of care and the practice of caring for somebody or caring for the world. Honestly, that is something that I continue to struggle with. And I don't have the answers for that. However, I wanted to share some of the questions that I have about myself, the relationship, technology, and society.
Mm. Yeah, sometimes, that we tend to see the artist is somehow very special, different creature from us. But I think this wall is also the show you are the artist living in the same time with us. Also don't have their clear answers to everything, but the struggle how to make their world better.
I think Hong Kong is a very big part of this. And CHAT and Jinwan, which is the area that the CHAT is located in, which I spent a significant amount of time. And the exhibition is really for that audience and that space. And I hope that the Jinwan people appreciate it. I'm really thankful for the CHAT staff and artists who made this happen. I do think about the role of an artistic director. We have talked intensively about this, about the idea of curating, directing, and collaborating. And in the exhibition, there are my solo pieces, my collaborations, and invited pieces that we've just selected and contextualized. I hope that's I hope that's clear for the audience. And I also hope that artists are okay with that. Because my practice is also educational, this almost seems like creating a textbook where I wrote the introduction, but the main content is actually done by other artists and we are editing it together. So it's almost like an open book.
Yeah, I think it's I can see that these are people really taking away from the different, the subjects and also concerned from this artistic textbook. And so I think it's even we had to discuss and decide virtually, but I'm sure all the energy that we created through the discussions is transmitted to the visitors. That's I believe.